Did you know Microsoft is raising the price of their first-party Xbox games to $80? Not only that, but they've increased the cost of their Series X console to $600, a $100 increase. This comes a few weeks after the Switch 2 Direct, where we learned games have the potential to hit the $70 and $80 ceiling. Nintendo also had to increase the price of their accessories for the Switch 2, similar to Microsoft, but the console's $450 price point is still intact. Considering things like inflation and the state of the world as we know it, it always felt like an inevitability that games and the consoles and accessories that surround them would be subjected to higher costs. But that doesn't mean we have to stand for gaming like this. That's why I'd like to take a moment to show you all my collection of consoles released before 2013. I know this may seem like I'm trying to brag, but just trust the process, okay? Let's start with the Nintendo 64. Fun fact, this is actually the first console my parents bought for me, this exact model to be exact. I've had many a great time with the N64, with trying to stumble my way through games like Majora's Mask, or spending hours playing multiplayer games like Perfect Dark and Mario Kart 64 with my brother and his friends. Sure, it wasn't as successful or had as many games as the PlayStation or even the Sega Saturn, but the Nintendo 64 still had consistent quality in its library of 388 games that you cannot go wrong with. Next, we move on to another sorta unsuccessful console from Nintendo, the Virtual Boy. The word sorta is doing a lot of heavy lifting here because this system bombed so hard, it was discontinued after only 1 year. I got this console from trading with my childhood best friend. I don't know what I gave him, but honestly, I could have traded a demo disc and I'd still be the one getting the short end of the deal here. Despite the justified hate, the Virtual Boy had a library of games ranging from confusingly really good to only offensive to the eyes. But since the console speed ran its own demise, it was only able to put out 22 games in its lifetime, both worldwide as well as its native Japan. What a shame. It had its whole future ahead of it of around maybe 30 games. Now let's move on from the Virtual Boy to the opposite end of the spectrum with the PlayStation 2. What the Virtual Boy did for failure, the PS2 did for success, selling over 160 million consoles in its 13 years of life. There's a reason for that. It's just that freaking good. This, I believe, is the console that set the standard for what gaming would inevitably become. During its heyday, I did come to own the original fat model after trading my brother a Tony Hawk skateboard for one. I ended up selling it, or something happened to it. Then in 2005, I got a slim model just so I could play Kingdom Hearts 2. By the way, best console revision of all time. Don't even try to fight me, you will lose. And this revision can play nearly all of the games for the PS2, which has a library of around 4,300 games. If you think that's a lot, don't forget the PS2 is backwards compatible with the original PS1's library, which was also around 4,000-ish games. Over 8,000 games. All through a console thinner than my patience with modern gaming. Next is a console released around the same time as the PS2, the Nintendo GameCube. This was Nintendo's last real effort to directly compete with Sony and Microsoft, and it was a great one. We got so many good games and new franchises from this console like Luigi's Mansion, Pikmin, and Animal Crossing. We also got a really good controller from it, one we are still seeing being used to this day. I got a GameCube maybe a little bit after it was released, this one to be exact. My parents and I went to the nearby Kmart to pick it up, and by the time we got back home, we barely realized that we forgot to get any games alongside it. So I kinda had to stare longingly at my console while looking at the games advertised on its box. We did end up getting me a game the next day, Luigi's Mansion, but that first night was particularly pretty brutal. Besides Luigi's Mansion, the GameCube had a not-so-large library of around 600 games, which is a far cry from the PS2, but it also falls in line with the Nintendo 64 and its games. Small library, big quality. The console itself is really small too and super cute, looking like a little lunchbox, especially with that handle right there. It's a cube that plays games, made by Nintendo. Now, you won't get that kind of branding from any other of the competitors now, will ya? This is the Xbox, Microsoft's first console and also their bravest. We know about the juggernaut they ended up becoming in the next generation, but this being their first outing must have been absolutely terrifying. Going up against Nintendo and the semi-new kid on the block Sony over 3 years into the generation was only a recipe you would want to follow for failure, much like the Virtual Boy. But they were able to stick the landing somehow. Now, nothing was ever going to beat the PS2, that was to be certain, but it was able to squeak by in front of the GameCube, selling just a few million more compared to it. And they did it with sheer power. The Xbox was the beefiest console at the time, packed with so much power, hardware, and potential. It didn't matter that the controller it came with was only usable by Shaquille O'Neal. Games were just better on the Xbox. Better looking, sometimes better running, better online thanks to the introduction of Xbox Live. Having one of these consoles made you feel like a god on the playground. I got one for my birthday, the bundle that came with Jet Set Radio Future, and I loved it dearly. Then I ended up letting my best friend borrow it, who then ended up saying that it got stolen by somebody. But I did remember a week later seeing that they had an Xbox just chilling in their brother's room, which wasn't there before. It's been over 20 years, so I'm more than over it, but still just pretty curious, don't you think? And if you're curious about how many games were on the Xbox, because I'm sure you're seeing what I'm trying to say with this video, it had a little less than 1,000 games in its library. Much less than the PS2, but still a lot more than the GameCube, with almost any multi-platform game you could ever want looking and running better than the competition. With that, we have finished talking about this generation of consoles, so let's move on to the next generation, starting with the first console released in it, the Xbox 360. How I talked about the PS2 setting the blueprint for modern gaming, the 360 refined it further with things like incredible online play via Xbox Live, the expansion of things like DLC and downloadable games through Xbox Live Marketplace, as well as fully pushing us all into the high-definition era. The 360 was the console that I was incredibly hyped for, watching every trailer, reading every blog post and news article, and looking at all the theories on all of the game forums. I was so hyped, I waited outside of a Sam's Club for 7 hours to get one, and that was one of the coolest nights of my life, both literally and figuratively. There was so much camaraderie because of how hyped we all were for the console, and we didn't know just how much of our hype would have paid off. With the library of over 2,000 games across the physical and digital releases. And what we also didn't know was how terribly it was made. Red Ring of Death is all I really need to say. Mine's broke so many times that my family and I just pretty much gave up on getting it fixed altogether. Like, what was the point of sending it for repairs if we knew that, like, literally the next month, it would just break again? They would eventually release 2 revisions for the 360, the Slim and the E, which were much more reliable and made the console smaller to boot. I never bought the revisions when they released, but that's because I ended up switching over to a console that I knew I could trust, that with its potential would revolutionize the console landscape as we know it forever. It's the Wii. That's right, I downgraded, quote unquote. The Wii came out a year later from the 360, and I was destined to get one. But I didn't think I would be destined to have it carry me for pretty much the whole generation. The Wii thrived on its unique motion controls and IR sensor that let you literally point at the screen and do things. That first time booting the console up and seeing the pointer being moved by your actual movements felt almost like black magic. I got one much the same way as the 360. I waited outside to get one on launch day, but it wasn't as much of a fun experience like with the 360. It just felt like an endurance test. It doesn't help that I had a bit of a tantrum earlier in the day because of some miscommunication, because we were originally supposed to wait at the Walmart to get the Wii, but they told us that the waiting actually happened the day before to get reservation tickets that they could bring in for launch day. So I started crying like a bitch for the entire Walmart to see. Then when we went into the car to go back home, I was still crying. And so this poor person that was parked in front of us got to have front row seats to an 11-year-old bawling harder than most infants over a stupid video game. But after all of that happened, we ended up just going to the Best Buy next door to wait. So all was good. Anyways, the Wii had around 1,600 titles in its roster, and admittedly a lot of them were garbage shovelware, but some good stuff in there. First party Nintendo games, some third parties, yada yada. Moving on. Man, this is embarrassing. The PS3 is the next in line, and I got it 4 years later in 2010, so I was pretty late to the party, but just in time for the console to make its big comeback. When the PS3 released, it flopped hard, pretty much being the modern-day Virtual Boy. But around 2009, Sony fed the console its Popeye spinach, giving it the strength to punch itself out of the hole with a new, more reliable slim model, a new ad campaign, and games. Like I said, I bought it in 2010, and while I didn't buy or rent hella games for it, I still had fun with the games that I was able to get for it. Metal Gear Solid, Infamous, Wipeout HD, Little Big Planet. God, what a good lineup the PS3 had. And that's barely scratching the surface of its library as well. The PS3 had around 2,400 games, which is not counting the PS1 and PS2 classics on the PlayStation Store, or the fact that you can play PS1 discs and on some of the launch models, PS2 discs, which expands the library even further. I wish I had more to say about the console, but really, I think its biggest strength was in just being a good console with good games. No real gimmicks or anything. It kind of just existed, which is what I can also say for the Wii U. Now, sorry if I can't go all Scott the Woz on this console, but I certainly do appreciate this little experiment that Nintendo did. I got this console 4 years ago from a seller on OfferUp who, when he finally brought it over to me to buy it, barely realized that it had a parental lock that he totally forgot the password of. So, since we both pretty much wasted time traveling to the Starbucks to do this deal, I made him another deal. That I would give him half payment right now, and if I can manage to unlock the console for him in the next few hours, that I'll meet up with him again to give him the other half. So I flew back home on my bike and got to work researching, which led me to calling up Nintendo customer services. I was put on the line with a dude named Mario who, and I swear to God, I am not joking when I say this, sounded exactly like Super Mario himself, accent and all. And after a little bit of back and forth, we were able to unlock the sucker, and then I was able to go about factory resetting the console. After I told the guy the good news, we ended up meeting somewhere nearby where I was able to give him the other half of the payment. He thanked me and actually told me he wasn't expecting me to get back to him, and he praised me for living up to my word. Now, I know it wasn't supposed to be a backhanded compliment, but in a small way, it kind of felt like it. Then we parted ways. The Wii U, as you could probably tell, is the sequel to the Wii, and just like most sequels, it did not live up to expectations. And despite many of the nearly 800 games being ported over to the Switch, the original Wii U versions provide an experience you legitimately can't get anywhere else. Now, this is the end of the home consoles I have in my collection, but we're just getting started because I still have a plethora of handheld consoles, starting with the Game Boy Color. This is once again not my original model, but this is the exact same color I had back in the day. Purple. My brother got a lime green one, and we both actually got a copy of Pokemon. He got red and I got blue. While I was maybe a bit too young to understand the games, I still had a very fun time trying to play along with my brother. The Game Boy Color, as most know it, is the upgraded version of the original Game Boy, introducing a better screen, more powerful internals, and of course, color. Since it pretty much still is a Game Boy, it's completely backwards compatible with all of its games, while having its own library of exclusive Game Boy Color games. Thanks to this, the Game Boy Color has a total of nearly 2,000 games? I had a bit of difficulty trying to figure out what games are a part of what console, the Game Boy or the Color, so take this number with a grain of salt. Just to be incredibly safe, let's bump it down to maybe something like 1,200-ish, which is still a ton. Your road trips will always have something new to play, especially if we jump over to the Game Boy sequel, the Game Boy Advanced. You see, Nintendo is a master when it comes to naming their gaming consoles as literally as possible because it's literally an advanced Game Boy. I never had a model like this while growing up, only the SP, which was a clamshell and had a backlight, which kinda sucked, but better than nothing. Even then, I still really wanted one like this because it was always so elusive to me. Everyone I knew pretty much only had the SP, except for my cousin who ended up getting an SP not long after. Having it now though, I must say, it is way more ergonomic than the SP. It just melts into my hands. Besides the SP, the GBA had another model called the Micro. Thank you, past Nintendo, for doing my job explaining. Sadly, while this model managed to shrink itself enough to be a choking hazard, the Micro had to make some compromises in the form of removing support for original Game Boy and Game Boy Color games. That's okay though, because it's still able to play the full Game Boy Advance library, which is around 1,500 games big. If you got an original Advanced or SP, you can play all 3 console libraries, which would of course push the game cart to around 3,000. And it is crazy how 3 generations of a handheld still can't reach the library of the PS2. Literal crazy work, Sony. But not as crazy as what Nintendo did with their next console, the Nintendo DS. Yeah, is the Virtual Boy still in the room with us? Oh, okay, good. This was a crazy gimmick that didn't fail. This one right here is my original model I got for Christmas in like 2004 or something, and man, I don't hold this model that often, but God, it feels nice. I love the way the buttons feel, the size of the system. I love the way it looks like a weird-ass spaceship. It's so quirky. How can you not find it endearing? Well, 11-year-old me didn't find it endearing enough. When the next model, the DS Lite, was announced, I begged my mom to get me one, and when she finally gave in, I decided the best way to celebrate was to destroy my original Nintendo DS. So I put it on the floor in our computer room, jumped as high as I could, and stomped right onto it until it broke. Recording it all via Windows Movie Maker. That's lost media now, but I'm not gonna lie, I wish I still had it so I could see how much of an idiot I was. Still kicking myself to this day. But yeah, the Nintendo DS was really cool. It had a lot of really cool first-party and third-party games that, thanks to the DS's unique features, made for some really fun experiences. Speaking of games, there was nearly 3,500 games released for the DS. Yeah, this console kind of popped off pretty hard with the general public. And if you include the system's backwards compatibility with GBA games, you have a handheld that can play almost 5,000 games. Sure, you can't play the original Game Boy or Game Boy Color games, but do you really need more games to choose from? Now, if you want more games, we can jump on over to Nintendo's competitor in the handheld space, and no, it's not a laughingstock. It's Sony with the PlayStation Portable, or the PSP for short. This is my launch model from back in March 2005, and as you can see, I switched the faceplate for an aftermarket one. It looked cool at the time, but nowadays, I just feel disgusted. It reminds me of those kids on GTA Online that make their cars all chrome because it's cool. The console ended up getting 2 more revisions that arguably made it better, but this first model has what the others don't. Some good old-fashioned charm. And it had one more thing that the others didn't. It had a really cool mechanism for opening up the disk drive to put your UMDs in. The handheld was unlike anything the world had ever seen, being as close as you could get to a PS2 in your pocket. So compared to the DS, it had a huge advantage with its sheer power, not to mention its multimedia capabilities. This thing used to be my one-stop shop for music, movies, web browsing, photography. The freaking thing had a camera that you could buy for it. The PSP did it all while having many great games to boot, some that were just as good as their console counterparts like Metal Gear Solid and Grand Theft Auto. But it still wasn't enough to take control of the handheld space. The quirky nature and casual appeal of the DS was just far too much for Sony to put a stop to. But this didn't stop the PSP from getting a hefty library of nearly 2,000 games, which, for a first-time handheld, is really good. You know, Sony's got a real knack for this whole gaming thing. My next handhelds I have to show are the Nintendo 3DS, released in 2011. Take a wild guess what this console's gimmick is. I received this one in 2013 as a sort of graduation gift from my dad, but like most kids feel as they get older, I felt guilty that my parent bought me something really cool, but really expensive. I felt so bad that I didn't open the console at all. Then a few days later, my middle brother came over and he was so annoyed that I didn't want to unbox the thing, so he took initiative and ripped the sucker open himself. I was of course not going to stand for someone enjoying my unboxing experience, so I took over and finished setting up the darn thing myself. The 3DS was pretty much second verse, same as the first, but with a lot more additions to the DS experience, such as a better home screen, better online, better graphics, and better controls. we got ourselves an analog stick on this thing here now. Well, it's a little nub, but same difference. The 3DS had a bit of a rocky start, but as the years went by, it got its footing and ended up becoming the worthy successor to the DS that it was meant to be. Later down the line, Nintendo made several different models of the 3DS, like the 3DS XL and the 2DS, which removed 3D, among a bunch of other features, to reach a budget price. They also released an upgraded model called the new 3DS and new 3DS XL, which added a right analog nub, an NFC reader, a better processor, and better 3D through the use of head tracking. It was pretty much the Game Boy Color of the 3DS era, and both models existed in tandem with each other. There was also a new 2DS XL, which is pretty much just a new 3DS XL, but lower quality and no 3D. Now, I know you won't believe it, but there was actually more games released for the 3DS family compared to console revisions, a little over 1,800 games, so about more than half of the DS's library. And you're probably not surprised to know that it's backwards compatible with that console's games, so bump that number up to around 5,300 games, and you've got yourself a console you can play literally for your entire life. You know what doesn't rhyme with the word life? Vita. But it does mean life, which our next handheld, the PlayStation Vita, had very little of. It's everyone's favorite underdog. The Vita got dealt a very bad hand in life. This is my original model, which I got maybe a month or so after the Vita launched in 2012. Please ignore the deteriorating Persona 4 golden skin on it. I know it looks bad. When the Vita was announced, I was incredibly hyped for it due to just how much effort Sony was putting into it. The way they had it sounding, it looked like the Vita was going to be the most powerful handheld ever made, and that actually held true at the time. This thing was practically a PS3 in your pocket, not only in power, but also in games. So many great first-party exclusives came out for this thing that looked almost as good as their console counterparts and play just as good too. You could play digital PSP and PS1 games, and Sony made sure it had the same multimedia strengths as its previous handheld. You could throw on MP3s, videos, watch YouTube and Netflix, browse the web, easily message and voice chat with your PS3 and PS4 friends. There were front and rear cameras, a touch screen and a rear touch pad, Bluetooth support, dual analog sticks, motion controls, an OLED screen. You would think the console was destined for greatness. But like I said, the Vita having a long-lasting life was never in its cards. Due to several things like smartphones gaining popularity, lackluster sales, neglect by not only third parties but also first parties down the line, the handheld died a very slow and painful death. We did get a revision that didn't really do much outside of excluding the OLED screen and that weird port at the top that never got used. And Sony also released a home console variant called the PlayStation TV, which lets you play your games on the big screen with the controller, albeit with lesser game compatibility since you're gonna be missing a lot of the Vita's features like cameras and touchpads. This wasn't enough to revitalize the system, and by the time the Nintendo Switch was out, the Vita and the PS TV were nothing more than just glorified PS4 remote play devices. A fate that, well, was actually not that bad. These devices were actually great at that. The game library. There was around 1,700 games released for the Vita. God, that is way more than I was ever expecting for this thing to ever have. And on that depressing note, that is the last of all of my game consoles I owned before the year 2013. Now, I don't own an Xbox One or PS4, and the current gen consoles were something that I wanted to exclude intentionally because I wanted to make a point. Like I said at the start of the video, the cost of games are rising to a disturbing degree. You should not be fine with the Xbox Series X, a console released in 2020, getting a $100 price hike this late into the game. It's depressing, but you shouldn't let this stop you from enjoying games. I just showed you numerous consoles that you may have or could potentially have in the future. And sure, they're much older consoles, but their games can be just as fun as any experience you could get with a modern title. They're also a lot cheaper too, if you know where to look. And if you don't want to deal with buying a console just for a game or two, then you can just buy the games, then emulate it. And honestly, to me, since a lot of these games are just never going to be re-released or remastered or remade or whatever, it probably doesn't really hurt to maybe find these games via other unsavory means if you're studios like Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo. And there's so many games to choose from. Combined, this console collection offers an estimated total of nearly 3,000 games that I can play. Sure, some may be multi-platform duplicates or unwanted shovelware, but even pushing those to the side, you still have a ton of games. You could likely play this library for the rest of your life if you wanted to. You could, but you probably shouldn't. There's always going to be new games worth playing. I'd be silly to deny that. But if you're someone who is worried about the future of gaming, then I implore you to take my advice. Don't waste nearly $100 every time you want to play a game. Don't pre-order a game or buy it day one unless you really, really need to, which most times you really don't. Just don't deal with the garbage that these big modern studios and developers want to put you through, especially if they're going to be shaking you down for every penny you got. It may seem like there's no choice since these are our consoles at the moment, and the studios think so too, but they don't have to be your only consoles. Don't pay $80. Just go retro. There are so many worlds of gaming just waiting to be unearthed by you. Worlds that are complete with no things like updates, microtransactions, or DLC, ready to be played at a moment's notice. Who knows? If we could all put the squeeze on Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo like this, maybe there might be some change, or at least a compromise. But I don't know. It's a long shot, especially with the state that the world is in at the moment. We might be waiting a long time until we reach some sort of normalcy again. Whatever the case, though, I'll be busy playing the classics. And hey, I got a second controller if you want to join me. Thank you for watching.